Hey, I'm Lauren Frick, and I'm a junior at Eastern Illinois University, and I'm majoring in journalism, and today I'm here with my friends.
Hi, I'm Gina Falvo. I study international relations and diplomacy at Ohio State University.
Hi, I'm Jacob Tharp. I'm a criminal justice major with a minor in sociology at Ohio University.
Hi, I'm Dakota Fox, and I graduated from Kent State University with a degree in political science.
And today we're going to do a short roundtable just discussing topics about current events and different articles that have been released over the past few weeks.
According to an AP article published last week, a recently released FBI report concluded that hate crimes in the United States rose to the highest level in more than a decade. The FBI defines a hate crime as a crime motivated by bias based on a person's race, religion, or sexual orientation. There were 7,314 hate crimes last year, which was up from the 7,120 that occurred the year before. However, only 2,172 law enforcement agencies reported hate crime data to the FBI out of about 15,000 potential agencies. This AP article served as the basis for the first question, which was, what are the factors that you think have contributed to the rise of hate crimes in America?
Okay, who wants to start us out?
I'll go. Okay, so I think leading factors that contribute to that. Obviously, we had like a decade ago, like in the early 2000s was 9/11, and so that just like really started a new base because before that, hate didn't really have a direction. Like it was just kind of equally distributed, but then it was focused on Islam and individuals from the Middle East. And then after that, obviously, for like the majority of this decade so far, we've had the Trump administration spewing their beliefs about Latin Americans and people from non-immigration or from non-United States centralized places.
Non-European.
Huh?
Non-European.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like with that, there's just been like a more solid base of like who to attack. So it's been more directed, and especially like from a political standpoint, when you have the president saying things like that, calling shithole countries, things of that nature, like it really gives it a base and really shows people that like, hey, maybe like this like hate crimes and like just hateful nature in general is more acceptable and should be more directed.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with the timeline as well, like how it started in like with 9/11 and things, giving people the permission that their internalized hate has like whatever validity they think it has. I also think going along with the Trump administration, again with the permissions, I think a lot of people, it became taboo in a lot of communities to be blatantly racist or homophobic or transphobic or whatever kind of biases they have. But with such an outspoken and hateful administration, it gave a lot of people the permissions to kind of spew that kind of hate without fear of repercussions.
Yeah, and I think building off of both of those, I think a decade ago, like us coming out of the Great Recession, we were beginning to really realize that divide we had economically between each other. And I think that furthered the divide that was being created since 9/11 among people with different religions, not just those with Muslim beliefs, but also it brought us to the point we are today, where hate crimes are higher than they have been, and we're faced with the problems that have been a culmination over time.
So what are your thoughts on, it's kind of an interesting dynamic right now how we've had the Trump administration, like you said, spewing one thing, but then now kind of in 2020 we've seen a rise in obviously the protests with George Floyd, and it's like actually a surgence of people. It's being almost a trend is a bad thing to make it a trend, but it's like more people are at least aware and becoming educated on these things. So it's like I feel like they're fighting each other. So like it's kind of a odd time.
I don't know. Well, I think about that like you can be educated on everything, but like you have to actively fight back against hate because like even like in the wake of like the George Floyd protests, the Black Lives Matter movement from this summer and everything, like there are still Republican Congress members on Twitter calling Ilhan Omar like a terrorist and that she married her brothers and spewing like hateful things. Like so we're all educated about that, but like we're still, and it was a newly elected Congress member, like a congresswoman elect is still saying these things to another congresswoman. And like, so in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests, these people are still being elevated to positions of power, and you're not really you can't combat hate by still having people in policy positions where they can have an influence on like real people's lives.
So would you say like, so there's been a surgence of like trying to be anti-Black, but it's not enough still compared to kind of the hate we've seen. Mm-hmm. Like they still kind of outweigh it, so it's not enough.
Yeah. Think? Well, and it's not even that like, it's not like there's like an imbalance where like there's way more hate for African American people, people of color, anything like that, than there is appreciation for them. It's just, especially with the administration the way it was, and like the way echo chambers like social media work, it's easy to have like the view that like, oh, there's so much more hate for this group of people than there is appreciation for them or anything like that.
Yeah, it's all what you're seeing and what you've been catered to anyway. Exactly. So it's hard to know like what every American's seeing, because you really only see what you want to see in those aspects.
So I think, yeah, it's definitely more of an equal distribution, just because like the silent majority, and like you see with election results, like the votes being split by 6 million, especially in a country of 800 million. It's way closer than you think it is.
I don't know if it's gonna like go with what we're saying, but I was gonna say, especially in like the recent years, especially with the late Obama administration and the Trump administration, I feel like a lot of people prior, at least in people that I've seen in my life, have been politically indifferent for so long, where they would just vote on party lines instead of kind of voting with policies that mean the most to them and affect their lives and the lives of the people they care about. But I think that especially being our generation and seeing active social media posts and things like that, especially with social media influencers, it got a lot of people to break that indifference. But unfortunately, that was on both sides. So you would expect it to be like, oh, people stopped being indifferent and now there's less hate because now everyone starts to care. But unfortunately it does. It's a double-edged sword. So.
Yeah, it's kind of like the big thing was registering people to vote. It's like you want that, but then you're kind of thinking like you're registering both sides. Like you're registering for people who will vote against your rights and things that you want, but it's like, where do you draw the line? Like, what's more important, I guess?
And that's like, I was like actively telling people to vote, and like just by telling like certain people to vote, I got a response from them that was like hateful, and they're like, oh, well, like, why do you care who I vote for? When I literally just told them nothing but to vote. Like, and it's that sort of like, with politics, everyone thinks it's just like so polarizing, like you have to agree or anything. Like, I'm not going to hate you just because like you're on the other side, but like, as long as there's reasonable discussion and you can back up what you believe in, like everyone's viewpoint can be validated and has a space.
Going off the idea of polarizing two different parties, like how much do you think that's played into hate crimes and the rise of hate crimes in America?
I personally don't feel comfortable directly drawing that like correlation between the two-party system and the rise in hate crimes. I think there could be some contribution, but I don't want to necessarily say that they're like correlated with each other.
You could even go off of like, I guess polarizing, not even the idea of just the two parties, but I feel like now, like it's gone beyond party lines. Like people, like it's Trump or not Trump in a way. Like it's like those ideals. So it's like, like just polarizing in America in general. Like I feel like we're very decisive in all issues, like one or the other. So like how has that kind of mentality contributed to this rise of hate and hate crimes?
I mean, that like the split between like the far left and the far right, whatever, like that's obviously going to breed hate. And so like with that, when people don't like have a nature to cope with someone else's viewpoint, like they resort to violence. And like that's also just like, I don't want to say it's uneducated to like resort to violence immediately, but that's like that sort of instinctual, like you disagree so strongly with what I think that I have no other choice to like resolve this peacefully that I have to go to violence. Like that's like the just attitude that brings like the polarization. But I mean, when you have people that like commit those acts of violence and then manifestos will use like shithole countries as like a backing to support what they did and try and justify those means, like through political means to appeal to a base of audience that would like sympathize with that and try to gain like appreciation or to just appeal to other people's ideals. Like that's where the polarization and like the political side of it can get really like dark, especially when it's being promoted on like a national level.
Yeah, I was gonna say how you said like a lot of times it feels like it's Trump and then not Trump instead of whoever the other candidate is or whatever the other party is, and I think a lot of that comes from his loyalists and people that it's more than a vote for them, it's more than politics for them. Now it's like it's a character trait, it's something their family believes. Now it's like almost
Personal.
It's very personal, and so people are taking it to a whole other level, and that is 100% from the Trump administration's messaging, the advertising. They're taking advantage of those people that don't have either the education or just the exposure because of their algorithm or anything like that, and they're definitely taking advantage of people with specific mindsets that can be taken over by the Trump administration or just hateful messaging because they've either never been exposed to it or already have those bias. It definitely is. I don't know if I would say it's like Democrat and Republican issue, but I agree with the Trump and not Trump situation. Or just like the lesser
or just
two evils.
disagreeing in general. Like I feel like
Right.
disagreement just brings a lot of like conflict for some reason, like extremely unneeded conflict.
There hasn't been like civil discourse about things. Like it's been like resorts to violence. There hasn't been like a discussion or like watching the debates this year. It wasn't a discussion. It was a yelling match, whatever.
And it's
Like
very
that's the way it
emotional.
is nationwide. It feels like.
Which honestly, it's become emotional because like I think that's obviously like you're saying like Trump's tactic. It's a strategy. I mean, obviously communication words are powerful, and if you know how to weaponize those, and you don't actually have the numbers or facts to support you, then you can use that. So
Exactly.
it just kind of fans the flames of the fire.
And especially when you go and you play off people's rights or people's like lives and their communities, like when you use that, obviously that's going to bring about an emotional response. Like there's no way to skirt around that and not be personally affected by that. With the AP article, one thing that's like, or the FBI report more so, is like the one thing that's scary is with hate crimes, like the underreporting. Like you said, the police agencies that would refuse to report that, and just probably the amount of underreporting, because obviously if you're a department and you have a high level of hate crimes, that is going to affect your funding, that's going to affect like the livelihood and the overall like view of that. So of course you don't want to report all the hate crimes that happen because it's going to have a negative effect. So that's like, even with us having a record year this year, like I think the numbers were projected about like 7,000.
And there was still like 2,700 police agencies that didn't report or something like that.
Exactly. So imagining like the real number of that probably being like definitely above 10,000, but maybe that even being just like half the cases reported.
And also it factors in, like I remember in my criminology class where you talked about like victims not wanting to come forward. And obviously that's true for a lot of like traumatic crimes, like especially if we're in a polarizing environment or you don't feel safe to come forward, like why would you? So it's crazy to think about what the numbers actually are, or if people even understand if they've had a hate crime against them. But like there's no really education, like it's always no one's been told like this is what happens to you, like you've been affected by a hate crime, like I don't know. And
even past that, from like a prosecutor standpoint, like it's also a little bit of like a money funding issue as well for the courts, because if you're charging someone with like misdemeanor assault, if it's any sort of hate crime, it's immediately bumped up to a felony. And felony cases immediately mean more jail time, immediately mean more resources for the courts, because you're going to have multiple hearings to figure out if this person is guilty of this felony or not. And the evidence supported, like to prove a hate crime, the evidence that you need to prove that there's going to need to be an investigation done, like a deep dive of this person who committed the offense of their life, to see if they have a hate or a bias against people.